Think about the earliest memory you actually have. Not one you've been told about, not a photo you've seen 100 times. An actual memory, something you can close your eyes and step back into. How old were you? 3? 4? Maybe 5? Now consider what that means. You have been alive for every single second of your existence. You were there, present and experiencing, from the very first moment. And yet the first chapter of your life is just gone. Not hazy, not distorted. Gone. You learned your native language in those years. You figured out gravity. You recognized every face in your family. You went from a being who couldn't lift their own head to one who could run and climb and throw. You processed more new information per day than your adult brain will ever come close to matching. And you remember none of it. This isn't selective forgetting. It isn't ordinary memory decay. Psychologists have a name for it: infantile amnesia. And it applies to virtually every human being on Earth, regardless of intelligence, upbringing, or culture. Something systematically erased the opening years of your life. And the reason why turns out to be far stranger than you'd expect. Let's start where the science starts, with the part of your brain that handles memory in the first place. Deep inside your brain sits a structure called the hippocampus. Think of it as the brain's filing clerk. When something happens to you, that experience gets scattered across multiple regions simultaneously. The emotional charge goes one place. The sounds go somewhere else. The visual details go somewhere else entirely. The hippocampus is the thing that collects all those scattered fragments and binds them into a single coherent memory. One you can retrieve on purpose. One that feels like yours. Without hippocampal involvement, experience passes through you. You might feel it. It might even change you. But you will not be able to consciously retrieve it. And here's the key. In the first 2 to 3 years of your life, your hippocampus was dramatically underdeveloped. Not slightly immature, not catching up slowly. Functionally incomplete in ways that made stable memory encoding nearly impossible. The neurons were there, but the dense, complex network of connections between them, the architecture that allows efficient encoding and retrieval, hadn't formed yet. A baby having a beautiful or terrifying or joyful experience is like trying to record something on a camera with no memory card. The lens works, the processor runs. There is simply nowhere for the footage to go. The memories don't form in the first place. That's the first part of the answer. But it's not the whole answer, because by age 2, your hippocampus was considerably more developed. Yet most people still have no retrievable memories from that period. Something else is happening. Here's where it gets genuinely strange. Your brain grows new neurons throughout your life. This was considered controversial for decades. The old assumption was that you were born with a fixed supply, and that was it. That assumption turned out to be wrong. New neurons are generated continuously, particularly in the hippocampus. And in early childhood, this neurogenesis happens at an extraordinary rate, faster than at any other point in your life. Now here's the twist. All those new neurons need to integrate into the existing network. They need to find their place, form connections, wire themselves in. And that integration process is disruptive. It destabilizes the connections that already exist. Think of it like this. Imagine a library. Not an organized, well-cataloged library. A young, chaotic one that's adding hundreds of new shelves every single day. Books are arriving faster than they can be properly sorted. The organizational system keeps changing as new sections are added. Old books don't stay where you put them because the shelves themselves keep moving. That is your hippocampus in the first few years of life. The very thing that makes the infant brain extraordinary at learning, that explosive generation of new neurons, is simultaneously the thing that makes stable long-term memory nearly impossible. The infant brain traded away memory consolidation in exchange for raw learning capacity. You were learning faster than any adult ever could. The cost of that speed was forgetting everything. But there's a third factor, and this one is the one most people never consider. Language. At first, this sounds almost too obvious. Of course, babies don't have verbal memories. They don't have words yet. But it goes much deeper than that. Autobiographical memory, the kind where you know you were there, where you can feel yourself moving through a moment in time, is structurally connected to language in ways that are hard to fully untangle. When you remember something, you are narrating it to yourself. Internally, you're constructing a sequence, a story, with yourself as the character moving through it. That narrative capacity emerges alongside language. And without it, experience doesn't get encoded as a story you can revisit. You can't remember, "I was there," if you don't yet have a stable, language-mediated concept of I. Studies across cultures confirm this. Children who develop language later also tend to have a later onset of autobiographical memory. Bilingual children often report their clearest early memories in whichever language they were using at the time, not the language they grew up to speak most fluently. Even children who learn sign language as their first language show the same amnesia patterns as hearing children who learn spoken language. It isn't spoken language that matters. It's language as a cognitive system, as scaffolding. The words aren't just how you describe a memory. They're part of how the memory is built in the first place. So now you have three overlapping explanations. A hippocampus too immature to bind memories reliably. Explosive neurogenesis continuously disrupting whatever consolidation was happening. And the absence of language. The narrative architecture that autobiographical memory requires to exist at all. All three real. All three happening simultaneously. Together they created a window of near-total amnesia covering the most consequential period of your life. But here's what makes this genuinely strange. The experiences you can't remember still shaped you. Completely. Permanently. Memory comes in two fundamentally different forms. Explicit memory is the kind you're aware of. The kind you can consciously access, describe, replay. Implicit memory is different. It lives in your body, your emotional reflexes, your automatic assumptions about how people behave and whether the world is safe. Infantile amnesia erases your explicit memories. Your implicit memories are completely intact. Think about what that means. The attachment patterns you formed in the first year of your life, whether you learned that the world was responsive and safe, or unpredictable and unreliable, aren't stored as memories. They're stored as settings. Default calibrations for how much to trust, how quickly to panic, how worthy of care you unconsciously believe yourself to be. If you were consistently soothed when you cried, your nervous system learned, at a biological level, that distress is temporary and help arrives. That learning shapes how you respond to stress as an adult, how quickly you can calm yourself down, how deeply you trust that things will be okay. If the response was inconsistent or absent, your nervous system learned something different. Not as a story you can tell, as a setting you can't turn off. You can't access any of the specific moments that built those patterns. You can't review them. You can't audit them. You just act on them, and occasionally wonder why you respond to certain situations the way you do. You forgot the experiences. You kept the lessons. The problem is, you can't examine lessons you don't know you learned. Now let's talk about something uncomfortable. Some of the earliest memories you think you have aren't real. Not distorted, not exaggerated, actually fabricated. Built by your brain from photographs, family stories, and repeated retellings, then filed as if they were genuine lived experience. This is extremely well documented in memory research. Here's how it happens. Your family has a photo of you at age 2. A birthday, a holiday, a trip. You've seen that photo dozens of times. Adults told you the story of that day. Eventually, your brain built a mental representation of the event. And then at some point, your brain filed that mental representation in the same place as your actual memories. Now it feels like a memory. It has the texture of a memory. You'd describe it as a memory if someone asked. But what you're actually accessing is a reconstruction built from external information, not a genuine trace of the original experience. Researchers have demonstrated that entirely false memories, of events that never happened at all, can be implanted through repeated suggestion and social reinforcement. And those false memories are experientially indistinguishable from real ones. Think about the earliest memory you have. Go back to it right now. Did you remember it unprompted, out of nowhere? Or did someone tell you about it first? Is there a photo? A story your family repeats at every gathering? For most people, the honest answer is that they can't be certain, which raises a strange philosophical question. If the memory is vivid, emotionally real, and functionally indistinguishable from a genuine one, in every way you can detect, does it matter that it might be a reconstruction? Your earliest self-concept, the story you tell yourself about who you were before you can remember being anyone, is at least partly a story other people told you about yourself, that you eventually absorbed as your own. There's no clean answer to that. But it's worth sitting with. Here's something that doesn't get discussed nearly enough. Not everyone's infantile amnesia is identical. Some people have what feel like genuine memories from as early as age 2. Others have nothing before 5 or 6. The average onset of reliable autobiographical memory sits around 3.5 years. But the range is wide, and several things shift it. Culture is one of them. Studies comparing children across different cultural contexts found something striking. In cultures where parents frequently engage in collaborative reminiscing, talking with children about shared past experiences, asking questions about what they remember, narrating their family history back to them, children develop earlier and more detailed autobiographical memories. The social practice of remembering together teaches children that their experiences are worth preserving, and it gives them the narrative scaffolding to actually preserve them. Memory, it turns out, is partly a social skill, and like all social skills, it develops faster when it's actively practiced and encouraged. Then there's the emotional dimension. The amygdala, your brain's alarm system for fear and intense emotion, is active and functional far earlier in development than the hippocampus, which means intense emotional experiences, particularly frightening ones, sometimes leave residues that ordinary memories don't. You might become inexplicably anxious in certain environments. You might feel an unaccountable sense of comfort at a specific smell or sound. You don't know why. There's no story attached. But the emotion remembered something the narrative never got to keep. And then there's sleep. Memory consolidation, the process by which new experiences get converted into stable, long-term memories, happens primarily during sleep. During slow-wave sleep and REM, the brain essentially replays and reorganizes the day's experiences, strengthening what matters and pruning what doesn't. Newborns sleep 16 to 18 hours a day. For a long time, researchers assumed this was just biological quirk, immature bodies needing rest. Some researchers now believe it serves a specific developmental function that has nothing to do with storing individual memories. The infant isn't sleeping to store files. The infant is sleeping to install the operating system. The foundational patterns that make everything else possible, how faces work, how objects persist when they disappear from view, how emotional exchanges flow between people. None of that gets saved as a memory. All of it gets processed into capability. You don't remember learning to see, but you can see. You don't remember learning that solid objects don't pass through each other. But you know it, instantly, effortlessly, every moment of your life. You don't remember learning to read faces for emotional meaning. But you do it automatically, thousands of times a day, without any conscious effort at all. All of that was learned in the years you can't remember. It was just filed in a different format. Deeper, more permanent, more fundamental than any episodic memory. So what does all of this mean for you, right now? It means the first years of your life were not lost just because you can't retrieve them. They were, in many ways, the most consequential years of your entire existence. The years when the foundational architecture of who you are was laid down at a level deeper than memory can reach. The way you attach to people, the speed at which you trust, the things that destabilize you and the things that settle you, the intuitions you can't explain, and the fears that seem to have no origin, they all have roots in a period you cannot consciously access. You are built from experiences you cannot access. That's either terrifying or liberating depending on how you hold it. On the terrifying side, you can't examine the foundations. You can't go back and audit the first 3 years. The influences are real, they're operating constantly, and they are entirely outside your conscious reach. On the liberating side, the absence of explicit memory means the absence of a fixed story. You don't carry a narrative about those years. And that means the implicit patterns they created can be updated, not by remembering, because there is nothing to remember, but by new experiences that give your nervous system different data. Safe relationships. Consistent new evidence that the world operates differently from what your 3-month-old nervous system concluded. The brain is plastic. The early patterns are influential, but they are not destiny. They're just the starting position. And here's the last thing worth considering. Every generation is shaped by experiences they can't remember, passed down from caregivers who were shaped by experiences they couldn't remember either. Anxiety patterns, attachment styles, default expectations about whether people can be trusted and whether you deserve to be cared for. These move through families across generations, not as stories, not as explicit teaching, but as calibration, as the emotional atmosphere of earliest life that no one consciously decides to transmit. You received something from your caregivers that came from their caregivers, not as stories, not as lessons deliberately taught, but as the texture of how they responded to you before you had any awareness you were absorbing it. The first years of your life happened. They mattered more than almost any other years that followed. The memories are gone, but what they built is sitting inside you right now. quietly running the show in ways you barely notice. You just weren't allowed to keep the receipts.